Hello, happy Saturday. Welcome to a bonus episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I don't usually have a lot of Saturday episodes, but today we have Taylor Haase of DKPittsburghSports to come on, review the full regular season for the Penguins, and then obviously do maybe a little bit of a small preview of what to expect in the Penguins-Rangers series. That's all coming up right after this drop.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to a special Saturday episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. So, of course, joining me now is Taylor Haase of DKPittsburghSports. Been trying to get her on for at least a good bit now. Glad that we can finally make it happen. Taylor, the regular season is over. Penguins, Rangers, which something I think we've known for, the last 3 months, something like that. It's going to be a pretty interesting series. We'll obviously get into that a little later on in the show. But, in terms of the regular season, was there anything really that surprised you about the team or that didn't surprise you, maybe?
I mean, honestly, just that they made the playoffs. I feel like the past 2-3 years, people are saying, this is the year the streak ends. I think when we did our own previews coming into the season on our own podcast, I think I said, this is the year that maybe the Penguins don't make it. But I think just, the disparity between the playoff teams and the non-playoff teams, no one expected that, for the Penguins to have, 100-point season. So just that, with the core aging, that they were able to make it, I think is a surprise to some level.
Yeah, I mean, it is always a bit interesting, when people do pick them to miss it, because I'm like, when it happens, then I'll maybe be more believable, I guess, with it. But, I did understand this just because the Islanders were coming back and they were expected to be really good again. And then you have the Rangers who improved and, Washington's still there and all that. And some people even picked Philadelphia to be good. And, some of those didn't pan out. Some of them did. But the Penguins were able to have those really strong 4 months, I guess, after the month of October where they were mowing over teams. But, one player that I guess didn't really play well this year is, Kasperi Kapanen. He's definitely, I think, a player that, I hate ragging on someone like that too much. I don't want to kick someone when they're down a lot. It's just, it really came, I think, to a head last night, in the game 5-2, the game is basically over. Kapanen takes a really dumb penalty and then puts the Jackets right back into the game. And, you have people like Bob Grove, who I obviously love, saying it's time for, maybe some players to come up from Wilkes-Barre. Do you think we're at a point now where Mike Sullivan potentially healthy scratches him in the postseason, despite, the injury to Jason Zucker?
Yeah, I mean, towards the end of the regular season, I understand why we didn't see it more often, just because they literally just did not have the cap space to bring up any extras. So it kind of forced their hand. But yeah, at this point, I really just don't see a spot for him in the lineup. He hasn't been able to find chemistry with guys in the top six. And he's just really not a guy who contributes much in the bottom six. He's not someone that you're getting a lot of on the special teams. And that's something that's really important when Sullivan's putting together his line combinations. And now that, there's no salary cap, no roster limits, there are guys in Wilkes-Barre who would make for better bottom six options and could, potentially contribute on the PK and stuff like that. So I think at this point, Kapanen might be sitting in the playoffs. I was surprised they didn't play him in Philly when they did healthy scratch him towards the end there. His dad was in town, and he was Sammy Kapanen. He came over from Finland. He was there at the game. And figure, if you're going to get something out of Kapanen, it would have been that game. But it doesn't seem like motivation really was the factor in this at all. It's not that Kapanen doesn't care. I know I see people, saying that. It just not, it hasn't been clicking with him. But yeah, it's not for a lack of effort or not caring. So I don't know. I'd bring up someone from Wilkes-Barre at this point.
Yeah, something just seems off. He obviously had that great year last year, lights up training camp, lights up the preseason. Everyone's expecting, so many great things to happen with him. And, Mike Sullivan's calling him, I think, an elite player at times. And then this happens and he makes $3.2 million after the season. I have to assume the Penguins are not going to pick up that qualifying offer to him, and he'll probably be a UFA. And speaking of Wilkes-Barre, obviously Taylor, you followed them very much so. As was one of the reporters. Who are you looking to call up? Is it, Drew O'Connor, who's off his injury, Radim Zohorna? Is it Valtteri Pustin? Who would you be looking to potentially replace him as either in the lineup or as like a 13th forward as like insurance?
Yeah, so we're looking at someone in the bottom six. I'd go with Drew O'Connor. Pretty clear. I think he's been ready for a while now for that kind of role. It's something, he can fill. He's a real, power forward type. He's better suited for a third, fourth line role over someone like Kapanen. When he got sent down after his, there was a reported collapsed lung, Sullivan said one of the things they were hoping to see from him is just to learn how to kill penalties, because again, that is, like I said, something that's very important when figuring out which forwards are going to be in the lineup. Learning how to do that at the NHL is not the easiest transition. So yeah, that was something they were really looking for him to do. It's not something he did a whole lot early on during his time in Wilkes-Barre, but he has become one of the more regular penalty killing forwards in Wilkes-Barre, and he's been good at it. Wilkes-Barre's penalty killing has been great. So I think he's ready. One of the reasons we didn't see him come up, towards the end, even when they did have the cap space, when McGinn was on long-term IR, they did not have the cap space for O'Connor because he had, up to $850,000 in potential bonuses, and you can't, when you're calling up someone on using LTIR, you have to have the room for their bonuses, even if they don't hit it. So it literally was not possible for O'Connor to come up before now. So now that it is possible, I think we finally see him. He would be my first pick. Zohorna would probably be my second one for a bottom six role, but it seems like his pace, conditioning has been the concern Sullivan has with him, being able to sustain that pace. Zohorna, he had a really tough start to the season. He was sick for about a month or so. It wasn't COVID. They didn't know what it was. And even when Zohorna did come back, he said he wasn't feeling right for a while. And it really did affect his conditioning and his ability to maintain that kind of pace. And then even towards later in the season, it sounded like Sullivan still had concerns just with his ability to play with pace. And then, Pustin would be my third pick. I wish we would have seen more of him at the time, beyond just the one game. He had a good game. Sullivan seemed to really like it. I don't know if bottom six role is, something they see him being in long term. He's more of, a top six winger, but his defensive game is not an issue at all. He's not a liability. He actually is very good for Wilkes-Barre defensively. Something JD Forrest has told me a bunch of times is, they're not afraid to put him out there in any situation. If in the defensive zone, those kinds of situations. So even with his size, he's pretty small, but I think he could be in that kind of role, but he would not be my first pick.
Yeah, and I know the cupboard is obviously very small, I guess, down there, just because the Penguins prospect pool it's not compared to some of these other teams, but for a team that's definitely had their legs have not been what they were early on in the year, I think some fresh legs, especially for a playoff game or two, I think could go a long way. I mean, I liked what I saw from O'Connor at the beginning of the year. I mean, he was putting up some goals and looking like a completely different player compared to what we saw last year, where it looked like he wasn't going to be a fit in the NHL, but went back down to Wilkes-Barre. It looks like played really well, and then even after the injury, he's played well. So I do hope that one, if not all three of those players come up at some point. But I feel like Wilkes-Barre is going to want to use them for their playoffs right now, at least to start. And then maybe if the Penguins say they go down 0-2 going back home to PPG, I feel like they could potentially use a call up there, but I'm not super sure. I know that Kapanen is he's not what he once was, and he's hurting the team, I think, in all three zones at this point. Another player, though, that I think could be starting to turn it around, Taylor, before we get to a commercial break, Evan Rodrigues. He had a great game, I thought, against Columbus, for the last game of the regular season. It's been a tale of two seasons for him. First half looked like a player that you probably wanted to give $5 million to. You'd probably want to throw yourself in front of a car for him. And then the second half of the season, you just want to basically drive him to the nearest train station or something. But that game last night was really good. I mean, he was getting a lot of great looks I thought. Got that goal, hit the crossbar a couple of other times. And of course, my puppy over here is still doing a couple little whines. I'm sure he's, whatever. But I still think, if they can get the first half level Rodrigues back for the playoffs, in my opinion, he's probably better than anyone in the Rangers' bottom six. And I know they've improved down there after the deadline, but I think that's a big deal for Pittsburgh if they can get that level of play back from him.
Yeah, even if it's not, that first half level of Evan Rodrigues, just somewhere in the middle, because the drop off was so steep between the first half and the second half for him. So even if they can just get him going a little bit, would just be huge for them to get that kind of depth scoring. Because his goal in the regular season finale, that was only, I believe, his fourth in his last 49 games, and it was just insane given the way he looked in the first half and what he was doing for them on the top power play. I was comparing him to Ovechkin a lot because half jokingly, but just the one-timers from the left circle they were getting from him on the power play. It's maybe this guy should be an all-star. But then second half of the season, it's just hard to figure out what happened to him. He was talking a lot early, in the first half about how he was just attributing everything to confidence. When you're confident, it just shows on the ice. So it's did his confidence wane at all? It's hard to really say. He didn't really have answers. I know he said, when he did get put in a bottom six role, focusing on, his defensive game became more of a priority, but that doesn't explain just the 4 goals in 49 games. But yeah, we saw, a little bit of that first half, Evan Rodrigues come back in the regular season finale, just the goal, but then the chances he was getting a couple of those one-timers from the left circle too, the flashes the first half, Evan Rodrigues. So if they can just get him going, at all going into the playoffs, that would be huge. And he did sound confident talking after that game, and how it's a clean slate, and it's just a whole different mentality going into the playoffs. I'm not sure how he would know coming from Buffalo, but he seems pretty hyped about it. But expecting big things from him.
Yeah, and that I remember that biggest one timer that I really remember from the season is the one against the St. Louis Blues where they had that 3-1 comeback in the third, and he rifled that from the left circle. I was like, wow, okay, that was a Alex Ovechkin goal over there, and if he could keep doing that, that would be very much appreciated. He hit the crossbar, I think, on one of those chances. Mm-hmm. Last night, he hit a couple other saves by Merzlikins that probably were going to be goals. But, talk about someone that really needed a bounce to go his way just because it has not been there for him right now. Still a lot more to get to for this show, for this bonus episode, I should say. But before we get to that, summer's coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations. You can throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. Make sure everyone has a bar so you are fueled for your summer adventures. And the best part about Built Bars, they're healthy and they are delicious. No more sacrificing delicious food or health. With Built Bar, you can have both, and it's easy. All you have to do is go to Built.com and order right now. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Again, there's an offer. You can go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at @LO_Penguins. So, Taylor, going into the playoffs, I think, one of the Penguins' biggest questions is, the goaltending, as it has been the last few years. They haven't gotten, near the level of goaltending that they got in 2016, 2017. Obviously, this year doesn't help that their starter is banged up going into this. I was going to ask you, Taylor, is there any really big update on Tristan? Last, I think I was listening to Elliot Friedman on the Jeff Merrick show a couple days ago, and he said the Penguins are crossing their fingers that he'll be available at some point in the series. I think he's been the only person to report that. Is there anything really that's going on with him, or is it just dead quiet right now?
Yeah, there's not much of an update. Sullivan just said, he's going through the rehab process. He hasn't been back on the ice yet, but as far as, crossing their fingers, that does kind of, that I think stem from something Sullivan said himself after a practice where, it was maybe about a week ago, someone asked a question about, just something about, DeSmith, if he is, the starter for game 1, what they're hoping to see from him. And Sullivan did say, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. And he said, Jarry is going through, the rehab process. So we're not going to see Jarry for game 1, given that he hasn't been back on the ice. But the fact that Sullivan was that optimistic at that time leads me to believe that, he might not be out. If they make a run, they might see him back at some point here.
I mean, yeah, that's obviously the biggest player they need to get back. It's been a little over 2 weeks since that reported broken bone in his foot. It was such a killer injury because there was like such little time left in that game, and they get a garbage time goal, and he finishes the game. It looks fine, and then he's out of practice, and that's the one injury that they couldn't afford. It'll be Casey DeSmith. It looks like starting game one, and Taylor, he's been mostly pretty good, I would say, since taking over. Honestly, for the last month to 6 weeks. He's really turned his game around. This was someone that, I think everyone was ready to drive to the airport in January and February, where I think I saw a quote. I think it might have been you that said, or you asked him, and I think he said that was like the lowest point in his NHL career with how he was playing. What is your confidence level in him going into a series against the Rangers, a team that has, they've had the Penguins number at least this season?
I mean, when you look at who they're going up against in Shesterkin, the Penguins were going to be an underdog either way in this, and now with Casey, I'm not confident that he's going to be able to, steal them a game where maybe Jarry would have if Jarry was on top of his game. I don't know. I mean, Casey, he really has turned his game around. That turnaround really happened. I want to say it was after the game in Columbus in January. When he came back from COVID, that was really his last, bad game. And then he started that next game against Detroit. It was an overtime loss, but that really did kind of mark the turnaround for him. I mean, before that, he got yanked, I think, like twice in a row. Really tough. It looked like Louis was maybe going to steal his job, but then Louis had the foot injury too. So kind of opened the door for Casey to keep that backup job. But it just his turnaround since then, so that would have been like late January. It really has been. He's been a capable backup. I'm not confident in him as a starter going into the playoffs, but he's proven himself as a backup. I would feel a whole lot better about the Penguins' chances if they had Jarry.
Yeah, I mean, it's the worst thing is just that, this was his time to really write his redemption arc after what happened last year, where he was probably the biggest reason they lost against the Islanders. He was this close to being ready for the playoffs. And, I got to feel for someone like that because, I'm sure he was looking forward to really getting the trust back from the fan base, especially in the playoffs. But, I think for the Penguins, in this series, they're going to have to really defend well in front of DeSmith. It's an area that I don't think they did well against the Rangers in their 3 losses. I think a lot of them were self-inflicted wounds. And, just speaking of that series, Taylor, I mean, I really do think Sullivan's going to have to make some adjustments to what happened in those 3 games, just because the Rangers burned them in, transition on the rush. And, I feel like the Penguins are just going to have to play, I guess, a more lower event style to beat a team like the Rangers. And, with how the Rangers play, I kind of compare them to not like a full Barry Trotz coached Islanders team, but I guess a mini version of them, because they're not going to give the Penguins much. And so the Penguins, they're going to have to actually fire the puck when they have it. You can't be looking for the perfect play. You can't be trying to be the Harlem Globetrotters over here, because, that's what it looked like in those 3 losses. It looked like Shesterkin was in their head and they were just trying to find that perfect play to beat him. But if you just get traffic in front of him, you make his life, a living hell. I mean, there's opportunities to be had there. What do you think, what do you think the Penguins need to do to win this series? Do you have a style of play that you think they need to adjust to? Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, what the players and Sullivan set up for the regular season finale when this was locked in, they talked about the Rangers' speed, their ability to play all 4 lines. They are a deep team, but the thing everyone kept mentioning, like you said, is the Rangers' transition game and ability to score off the transition. So just going to be about, playing tight defensively. Sullivan talked a lot about the forwards and the defensemen having trust in each other and supporting each other. He said sometimes what might look like an ill-advised pinch by a defenseman might just be when there's a disconnect between the forwards and defensemen and what the forwards' role in supporting the defenseman, what was supposed to happen there. So it's just going to be about, having that synergy and that trust between the forwards and the defensemen to shut down the Rangers' transition game. And also, I mean, the Rangers power play is obviously so dangerous too. So the PK, that's going to be huge. I mean, the regular season series, they only scored one even strength goal against the Rangers, and it was Brian Boyle. So I don't think you're going to be getting a ton of 5-on-5 offensive contribution from Brian Boyle. You're going to need the other guys to step up too in these games. So I mean, yeah, it's going to be a tough challenge. Shesterkin probably going to be the biggest challenge, beating him. Feels like the Penguins been running to hot goalies in the playoffs for a while now, and Shesterkin's going to be another big challenge.
It is crazy. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, going back to even 2016, heck, even 2014, Lundqvist, Holtby, Bobrovsky, who was one of the best goaltenders in the league before he wilted down the playoffs, Ilya Sorokin, Robin Lehner, who was playing well in 2019. And now, you're going up against a guy who saved 37 goals above expected this year, and he's probably going to win the Vezina, and he's probably a Hart Trophy finalist on a lot of people's ballots. So it's just, it is crazy that they go up against arguably the best goaltender in the league almost every year.
Yeah.
In the playoffs. But yeah, it's going to be a big challenge. I mean, I'm not, I guess, fully confident as I once was maybe about 6 weeks ago, but it's for the playoffs for a reason. They reset, and that's what happens there. Still have a little more to get to for this episode coming up in our final segment. But before we get to that, let's get to Bet Online. It's your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. You can find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. Bet Online is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. That is Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. So Taylor, going into the playoffs, and I probably said that about 5-6 times on this episode now, whatever. One player that definitely has caught my eye a bit lately, I'm surprised that struggled, Brian Rust, was a man on a mission going into these final 10 games of the season, and then all of a sudden, goose egg, all those in a row. And I don't know if he's banged up, but, he's been missing the net on a lot more chances than normal lately. His passing, I think, is also taking a step back. I know they tried to reunite him with Sidney Crosby and Jake Gensel, try to see if that's going to help him. In my opinion, I think he should play with Evgeny Malkin to put Rickard Rakell up there. We'll obviously get to that in just a second. Are you concerned at all for him going into the playoffs? Or, is this something that's probably going to turn around relatively quickly here, because he was one of their best players this year, 58 points in 60 games, 55 points per 60, one of the team leaders.
Yeah, I mean, like you asked, he might be banged up. I feel like everyone's going through something this time of year, but nothing stands out about him that would lead me to believe he's playing injured. But yeah, he has gone cold, and that did coincide with around the time when they put him back with Malkin, and I think putting him back up on the top line was breaking up, Rakell in that line. They'd been going, playing so well together, and I think putting Russ back up there was just, trying to get Russ to get his game going again. We really haven't seen that payoff since they made that change. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the lines, and if putting him back with Malkin and whoever Malkin's other winger is, depending on who's healthy. If that gets them going again, it's hard when we don't know who the other winger is with Malkin. When Zucker's going to be back, if he's able to play there. But I mean, it's definitely concerning, but I think that given the playoffs, it's a whole different ball game, whole different mentality going in. Guys are, getting up to a different level for that. Just mentally, it's like a reset. So maybe that alone can help spark Rust's game. But the line combinations, I think, are going to be a big part of what happens with him.
Yeah, I mean, and that would be big. I mean, he's going into a contract year. He's obviously going to make a ton of money. Even if it's not the Penguins, someone will probably throw Zach Hyman level money and him. He's been that good for the last few years, but he's definitely someone that I want to see more of going into the playoffs, just because I didn't expect him to struggle this much down the stretch. And, speaking of the line juggling, Taylor, I do think I would want to see Rakell back up with Gensel and Crosby. I mean, their 5v5 expected goals and shot attempts for and scoring chances for were through the roof, and their very limited time of action. And, Rakell just seemed like a seamless fit with Sid, he always said that when he had the puck on his stick, they were creating scoring chances at will. And I potentially think that could give the Penguins and maybe a little bit of an edge over the Rangers, whoever they're icing out against the Crosby line. Is that something you would look to Mike Sullivan to change going into the series, or do you think he's going to stick with Rust up there?
Yeah, I don't know. The Penguins didn't have a practice today, so it's hard to see what they're gonna try. But I mean, you figure these last couple games they were looking for something consistent. No more experimenting. They were trying to find consistent lines, what they're going to use going into the playoffs. So that leads me to believe that maybe Russ sticks up on the top line. I personally, like you, I would like to see Raquel back up there. Just the way that the chemistry he had with Crosby immediately when he got here. The first chance it was before he was even on Crosby's line. It was like that game where they teamed up for 3 goals and they were only on the ice for like 2 minutes together, just from overlapping. It was that overtime win. The way Raquel was able to find Crosby and on the ice. They just had immediate chemistry, and it did. Once they finally got extended time together, it really paid off. And Russ, we know, has had chemistry with Malkin in the past, and that was one of the reasons that they were fine putting Raquel up on the top line and making that shift initially. I would like to see them go back to that if Rust can get his game going with Malkin. But if they think he needs to be up there with Sid, I don't know if we're going to see that change. Just see, for us.
Yeah, I'll definitely be curious to see if Mike does the flip flop and maybe some other line combinations in the bottom 6. Maybe Danton Heinen comes up. He had a great year. I definitely think he's going to be someone that can make a difference in the playoffs with his 18 goals. Another player who I still think they need to have success, Taylor, they need Jason Zucker back, and it's approaching Bo Bennett territory at this point. I hate saying that because poor Bo Bennett, poor guy got freaking hurt celebrating a goal. I mean, once upon a time. I feel bad for laughing about that, but whatever. But gets hurt a couple games ago. Mike Sullivan very coy about it. You're not gonna really get, I think, a lot of information this time of year from honestly any team. I mean, you look at Nashville with UC Saros, nothing has come out about that other than they may not be confident that he might be ready for part of the series. But I guess the question is twofold. Is there a concern that it's related to the core muscle injury that he had? And, just how much of a loss would it be if he's not able to be in the lineup for at least part of the series?
Yeah, I mean, Sullivan, there's no update on Zucker yet. Sullivan wouldn't say whether it's related to his core muscle surgery. So it's hard to say. And I mean, looking at that game when he went out, it's not like anything happened, like a big collision or, he didn't get go down and then go off. He just kind of left the ice. No one saw what happened to him. So it's really hard to say what it is at all. We know it's lower body. Lower body could be that core muscle. You go back to when he came back against Minnesota and got hurt. He did talk after that. Zucker did talk after that, and he kind of made it seem like that re-aggravated or re-injured the core muscle surgery, whatever the issue was there. So I don't know if that was then something he was having to deal with once he came back after that second injury, or it's hard to say. They're so secretive about this. But yeah, that would be a tough loss. I mean, just for the scoring depth, you would like to see him on that second line if he's healthy, and get going with. It's hard to say what they're going to be missing without him, just because they have been missing him for most of the year, it feels like. And when he has been in the lineup, it's been sporadic. But when he has been in, he has had flashes of real contribution. So I mean, but then he has gone cold at other times. So it's hard to say what exactly version of Jason Zucker they're missing or what they would be getting if he is in. But I mean, if they can get Jason Zucker, at his best, I mean, that would be huge for being able to, shift, the other forwards down and get more balanced scoring throughout the lineup. But I know it's hard to say what they're missing because they have been missing Jason Zucker much of the year.
Yeah, I feel bad for the guy. I mean, it's just every time he comes back, there's just something else comes up. I mean, the last one of the last goals he scored, that was the tying goal, I think, against the Predators that sent that to OT before Sid had his magic happen. I think he's probably one of their best forecheckers on the team. He's a great fit next to Evgeny Malkin, especially. I think Gino could definitely use him as a winger, to say the least. I got one more thing here for you, Taylor, before we wrap up. I'm gonna ask you, do you have a prediction for how this is gonna go? I mean, I know a lot of people are definitely not as confident right now just because the team has not played well these last 2-3 weeks. They look gassed, fatigued. Their legs are not there. Defending wise, it has not been there. Their numbers have gone way up. They've usually, I think, been a top 5 goals against team for this year and defensively. How do you see this series shaking out? Because I read a couple previews today, and it's still, to me, it seems like a coin flip.
I'm gonna go with Rangers in 6. I don't think they're gonna get swept, or anything like that. I think the Penguins will at least be able to get a game here. I don't know, maybe 2. I don't see them making it out of this series. It is going to be a whole different ball game in the playoffs, and their 1-3 record against the Rangers. It's easy to see something like that change. I just think that they're going into this as the underdog, regardless, and without your number 1 goaltender, I just can't. I don't see them making it out of this series. I mean, the goaltending matchup, DeSmith versus Shesterkin. It would take a lot for the Penguins to overcome, just that.
Yeah, I'm not going to give my prediction just yet because I have to do the crossover with the Rangers guy, and that's where I'm going to make my prediction. But right now, I'm not leaning the right way, to say the least. The way I was feeling after that 1-0 win, that first matchup, it's definitely not there anymore, to say the least. This is going to be very tough for the Penguins to win, and if they don't win, there's potential big changes, I think, coming to the organization, I think, on the ice and potentially off the ice. But Taylor, I really appreciate you coming on. We're definitely going to have to do this some point in the playoffs or during the offseason going into next season. If by some ridiculous reason why people do not follow you on social media for Penguins content, and I can't think of one, at least for me, just plug your socials for everything with that.
Yeah, Taylor Haase, HAASEPGH is my Twitter. That's where I post everything. And then DKPittsburghSports.com is the website. Obviously, you can look at my author page on there. A lot of Penguins content, a lot of Penguins prospect content. AHL, college, junior, Europe. That's what I love doing. So you can find my stuff.
Perfect. Yeah, they'll be obviously, Wilkes-Barre and all the prospects will be doing it in their playoffs right at the time as the Penguins will be. So it's always, good time for everything involving the Penguins organization. For this podcast, next episode looks like will probably be Monday. We'll have the crossover with almost forgot the Rangers guy just had a baby. So I think it's going to be Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. So congratulations to John. He will not be on the show, but for the full series, we're going to have some other people coming on to do analysis and all that. So again, Taylor, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll talk with you all in a couple days.